Welcome back to Season 2 of Diablo 4, and with the release of Season 2, I'm back to making build guides. Today we'll be going over my Twisting Blades build for Nightmare Dungeons and bosses. I wanted to have a safe start to the season with a build that I'm familiar with to get me into the endgame as fast as possible. This build has insane damage output, mobility, and sustain that allows you to fly through dungeons and nuke bosses. In this video, we'll be going over both the setup for dungeons and the new bosses. And as normal, there will be timestamps for each section of the video. Starting off with the dungeon setup. For the skills, we'll be using Shadow Step, Dash, Twisting Blades, Shadow Imbue, Shadow Clone, and Puncture with the specialization combo points. Our Dash, Shadow Step, and Evade allows us to quickly move from pack to pack and get through the dungeon as fast as we can. Shadow Imbue is not completely necessary. Later on, it can be subbed out for Poison or Cold Imbue, but early it is our main form of energy sustain. Shadow Clone is mainly used for the end boss of the dungeon to nuke them even faster, but it really can be subbed out for anything. But if you do not have Penitent Greaves, I would sub this out for Methodical Caltrops to apply chill to get your crowd control bonuses. And to quickly go over the skill tree, we start off with picking Puncture with Fundamental Puncture, Twisting Blades, max that out, pick up Advanced. We go 3 into Sturdy. We're not picking up Siphoning Strikes because of the Vampire Power that we'll talk about later, but if you are feeling like you're lacking some health sustain, you can swap Stutter Step out for Siphoning Strikes. Shadow Step with Discipline Shadow Step just to have that up more often. Max out Weapon Mastery, Dash with Enhanced Dash to just give us some crit damage bonuses on the enemies that we do dash through. Then we're going to take 3 into Exploit, 3 into Malice, only 1 point into Shadow Imbue, and then Consuming Shadows for that energy, 3 into Precision, 3 into Frigid Finesse, Shadow Clone, and we're going to pick up this entire tree here just to get some more lucky hit. And what's really nice about this is it gives us some more energy sustain here. Then moving on, we just max out Haste just for some movement speed. And for our Mastery skill, we pick up Close Quarters here, and Close Quarters did give us a buff this season, going from 30 to 40% increased damage against crowd control, which is really nice. You can pick up Momentum if you're feeling squishy and are wanting to push higher dungeons, or Victimize is also fun to play around with. Onto our gear and stat priority. I'll be showing you screenshots of my gear, and it's not the best. It's kind of scuffed, but I wanted to show you what I was using and talk about the ideal stats to get. For your helmet, go for life, armor percent, cooldown reduction, and ideally any resistance roll. For the new season, resistances are much more important, so it's really important that we do get those balanced out as best as we can. For the aspect, I went with might, as it'll be up all the time with combo points. With the chest plate, I did just realize in this video that mine is terrible, but ideally you'd want life, armor percent, damage reduction, and damage reduction from distance with the aspect disobedience. Gloves, you want to get ranks to Twisting Blades, crit chance, lucky hit, and either attack speed, dex, or all stat with the aspect expectant. Pants, I'm using Tibalt's Will. These pants have been absolutely insane paired with the Vampiric Power Metamorphosis. It allows us to have the 40% damage multiplier up pretty much all the time. If you do not have these pants yet, just go for some legendaries with life, armor percent, damage reduction, and damage reduction from distance with the cheat aspects. For our boots, I am using Penitent Greaves. These can be farmed pretty easily from the new bosses Gregor or Lord Zir. If you do not have Penitent yet, find some movement speed legendaries with Ravenger's aspect for another Shadow Step charge until you get these. And for our weapons, on our crossbow, go for dex, core damage, damage to close, and damage to vulnerable with the aspect accelerating. For my melee weapons, on one hand I'm using Condemnation and the other hand a sword. For the sword, go for dex, core damage, damage to close, and damage to vulnerable with Edge Master's aspect. You can also sub the sword out for another dagger if you do want to have more attack speed. I found that the attack speed I had was plenty, and the sword just hits harder than a dagger. But at the end of the day, it is up to you, so whatever you prefer, go with that. And lastly, we have our jewelry. On our amulet, we want total armor, damage reduction, ranks to Frigid Finesse, and the last roll you want either movement speed or cooldown reduction. And if you are using Tibalt's Will, go ahead and put Cheat's aspect here. If not, go for Vengeful until you have those. For your rings, get life, crit chance, damage to vulnerable, and then your last roll, I would recommend either lucky hit chance, crit damage, or physical damage. For the aspect, on one ring we want energizing, and on the other, blade dancers. For the gem slots, put rubies in your armor for extra life, emeralds on your weapons for critical damage against vulnerable, and for your jewelry, you want to go ahead and balance your resistances out. So whatever resistances you're lacking, place the gems accordingly here. And now for this season's mechanic, the Vampiric Powers. First up is Metamorphosis. This power transforms our evade into a mini dash, which gives our evade a longer dash range, and an unstoppable for 4 seconds, and it is a CC break. Not only that, but as I mentioned before, pairing it with Tibalt's Will gives us a very nice damage stem for 8 seconds. Next is Ravenous. This is our strongest power, giving us a free 80% attack speed at max movement speed. This is super important to allow us to fly through energy as fast as possible, which will be important once we talk about our bossing setup. Not only that, it just feels super nice spamming Twisting Blades and having a storm of blades circling you at all times. Following that, we have Prey on the Weak. As enemies are always vulnerable for us, this just gives us a 16% damage multiplier. And our last two powers, Resilience and Undying. Resilience gives us a 1% damage reduction for each 2% life we are missing, and Undying heals us 3% life for every skill we cast. Paired with the insane attack speed of this build, you heal ridiculously fast. And onto our Paragon Boards setup. So if you've been following me in the past, you'll see that I'm still using the 6 glyphs setup. I just feel like this is the best out of what I've tried. But since it is season start, I am going to just talk about the pathing that you should take here and what to prioritize first. So starting off with the first board, don't pick up any of the extra life or resistances until later on. You kind of just want to get through the board and pick up the legendary nodes and get as many glyphs down as fast as you can. However, I would go out of your way to get this cluster of rare and magic nodes first. This is about 90% additive damage to your skill, and early on that's a huge damage spike. So moving on, pick up Tricks of the Trades first, then go ahead and place Chip in this glyph. Then moving over to this board, the Cheap Shot board, I would come down the left here and pick up Cheap Shot then, and then later on swap over to this to get the damage reduction from elites. I do have Combat in this board. Then we move up to the No Witnesses board, where I have placed Control for that damage against crowd control bonuses. And then again, just ignore these life nodes until later on. And then lastly, we have the Deadly Ambush board for Turf. And the reason for Deadly Ambush is just because it has the most strength on it. And yeah, that pretty much sums up the Paragon boards. And that sums up the dungeon setup. So now we'll go ahead and talk about the bossing setup with the 5 new endgame bosses. And to target farm uniques, I just want to have a setup where I could just swap back and forth really easily and not have too much invested into it. For the skill changes, we only make one change here. We swap Shadow and View out for Discipline Caltrops. This gives us a 10% crit chance bonus against enemies that are in the Caltrops, which just gives us more consistent damage output, landing those crits. And on top of that, it pairs really nicely with swapping Cheap Shot for Deadly Ambush in the Paragon boards, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And for our gear changes, we swap our amulet out for the new unique Banished Lord's Talisman. This amulet gives us crazy damage against bosses and also just against dungeons in general, giving us crit chance 2 ranks to our core skill and the unique effect. After spending 300 energy, our next core skill is a guaranteed overpower, and overpower crits do up to 120% more damage. This is why we stack so much attack speed with the build. When this procs, it just chunks bosses HP. If you are just wanting to run lower tier dungeons and farm and level and aren't needing to be tanky, I would just recommend using this amulet at all times at the moment. And lastly, the Paragon board changes. Now, really the only changes that you have to make just for a fast damage boost without too much investment is just taking out the 5 points leading to Cheap Shot when you have the damage reduction against elite nodes. and then just putting them into deadly ambush. It's just 5 points here and 5 points there, so it just works out nicely, and that's really all you have to do. But if you're going to farm bosses for a while and you just want to go full into damage, I would spec out of all of your extra life and resistance nodes, go into no witnesses, as well as respecking all the way back to this point. Go into no witnesses, and then just pick up whatever damage addition nodes you have across the board. But if you are just wanting fully strict damage against bosses, I would swap out or just completely take control out, because that doesn't do anything against bosses, and swap the cheap shot board for the exploit weakness board, and then probably just put ambush in there for increased damage when they go into your caltrops. But yeah, that sums up the Paragon boards. And that brings us to the end of this build guide. I know you guys are probably sick of twisting blade builds as they're just constantly put out, but unless it's something super unique with twisting blades, I'm trying to stay away from twisting blades this season after this build guide. I just wanted to have a safe start, and twisting blades is just super strong for leveling and flying through dungeons. I did post a poll on my channel for what build you want to see next, so go vote on that and I'll get working on it. And let me know in the comments if you would like to see build guides based around the Uber uniques. So far I've dropped Doombringer and Adriel's Visage, but I didn't really feel right making a guide that uses them not even a week into the season. Anyways, if you've enjoyed this build guide and are wanting to see more, leave this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss out. That's all for today. Remember to have fun and take care.